And that was Mob Boss, Fred Olen Ray's epic comedy masterpiece. I think that's the first thing I did for Fred back in 92, 90, something, 19. We're talking 19, not 2000, way back in the old days. And at the time, those were not old days, okay? Just so you know, those were new days. And Fred, I met Fred, the first time I encountered Fred Olen Ray was a billboard, okay? I was working on Sunset and Doheny, which is eventually where I recorded my first soundtrack in Shadow Stevens Studios. But I'm working for Shadow. I look out the office window, my office window, and there's a giant new billboard up there for a Fred Olen Ray movie. And gosh, what was it? See, this is where I should take notes beforehand. But anyway, it was a giant billboard. And I said, Fred Olen Ray, I should be writing music for him because that looks like the kind of movie I would write music for, right? So he contacted me within a few weeks. It was like the power of attraction, right? And so he calls me and says, I think it was Beverly Hills Vamp or Mob Boss. I can't remember which one. I think it was Beverly Hills Vamp, which I'm going to play for you soon here. It was Beverly Hills Vamp. And so I did this short score for it because I had other things. It was, back in those days, the music was rolling. The jobs were coming in constantly. There were only 60 composers in LA, not 18,000 like we have now. And I had to do them quickly and cheaply and totally alone. I very rarely, if ever, had help. And that was the fun part. What you're going to hear on this show is not only my opinion about film scores of today and yesterday, but you're going to hear a unique history because I am, as far as I know, the only composer, film composer living who started as a film music fan. And I was a film music fan for 30 years before I started writing the music. So that puts me in a unique position. I do not come from film school or music school or any of that. This was practical listening, playing, experimentation. Let's listen to, I promised you this, right? The first score I did for Fred was Beverly Hills Vamp. And here's a little sample of that. Starring Eddie Deason. And Eddie, who kind of felt like Jerry Lewis, is that why he was cast? And that's why he was in 1941 as the Jerry Lewis character? Anyway, that was Eddie Deason. That was his movie. He was also in Mob Boss, which I played for you first. Let's go on to another tune now from the same era. I believe this came to me through Fred Ray, but I believe this was directed by Grant Waldman. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Grant and Fred, but this is just a little ditty from a very long score of Teenage Exorcist. Okay, check this out. This is the theme played subtly. I have different versions of this, which someday will be available. So where did these ideas come from in my mind when I was doing this? All right, so when I sat down to do a score, it was always supposed to be in my mind something that you could listen to outside of the film. So for the most part, what I wrote was something I'd want to hear outside of the film. At the time, I didn't realize how primitive my recording was, and it sounds like, cheese bag. But that's the way it all sounded back then. That's the equipment I had. I didn't have an engineer. I didn't have a manager. I didn't have an agent. All I had was the equipment and not much advice. There was no one you could call. There was no internet. So I would be on the phone to Guitar Center, and you know what that's like if you've ever called Guitar Center. Great place, but these people were not the epitome of knowledge when it came to these pieces of software or sampling or whatever. I did find some help other places, however. Well, hey, we're on an Eddie Deason run here, it seems. I didn't plan for that. But so we're going to jump off into something else here. Let's check out something I did in the same era, but completely separate. So I get a call from the Kyoto brothers, right? They're doing a TV series called The Amazing Live Sea Monkeys. And they say, Chuck, we'd like you to come in and direct some of these. And I go, fine, because I'd been directing the Federated commercials with Shadoe Stevens, and they were funny. And so the Kyoto said, come on in with a few other directors, and I started directing Saturday morning television, right? So 2 episodes in, and I'm supposed to do a 3rd episode, and Steve comes to me, or was it Steve or Ed or Charlie, or was it Steve Eccleston? I don't remember, but somebody came to me and said, Chuck, we understand you do music. Would you like to score the series? And I said, oh, yeah. I said it just like that. I believe they quoted me several times in interviews. But yes, I want to do this. I want to score a TV series. And especially since the Kyoto brothers doing amazing prosthetic makeup in this show. And in directing, I got to work with the actors, right? So knowing that these actors are wearing literally a refrigerator under their costumes. They're wearing a suit under their costumes that refrigerates them. So this had nothing to do with the music. I'm just rambling wildly. Let's play the theme from The Amazing Live Sea Monkeys. That particular piece of music is owned by me, the Kyoto brothers, and none other than Howie Mandel, who was the star of the show, and he actually was the auspicist that got the show on CBS. And I got to direct him. He was so much fun. He was like, and I was his favorite. He told me this off on the side. Of course, he's probably told every director that was on the show this, but he said, Chuck, you're my favorite director because you let me do what I want to do. That's Howie Mandel talking to me. So that's The Amazing Live Sea Monkeys. There's a lot more music there. Oh my gosh. So many themes that I wrote for that show. So much fun music. I want to put that out. I'll talk to Howie, see how he feels about it. Let's go on to something a little more low-key from a similar era. It's a low-key but jazzy kind of Ghoulies theme. Okay, so I just scored a movie called Ghoulies 4. Was it 4? 3. One of the Ghoulies movies I scored, okay? And there are people that actually know which one I scored. I don't, because I think there were 9 of them. Or there are 12. There's 3. Okay, so the Ghoulies was something that Jim Wynorski directed for Cinetel, and he wanted something along the lines of other scores I had done, like the theme for Munchie or Munchie Strikes Back, but I wanted to give Ghoulies a much darker feeling because it was a darker movie, okay? Anyway, this is a little bit of a jazzy theme thing from Ghoulies 4, okay? While we're on the Ghoulies run, right, because I've got a few cues here from Ghoulies, hasn't been released yet, and I think that Ford and Mark of BSX and Dragon's Domain Records, who do most of my releases, will eventually release Ghoulies. So that's something nice. And there's some really fun music in that. I don't remember what my influence was except for just having fun, making sure that there were themes attached. Themes, to me, are the most important part of a film because they create a character. They help build a character. If you don't have a theme, your character kind of like is dependent on the actor, which is great, okay? Actors are great, but you can enhance a performance with a theme. You can enhance a story with a theme. And, well, let's not talk about that. Let's keep going on. Let me play this other cue from Ghoulies. And this is called, let's see, I have a note here, Ghoulies Orchestra. I never used one real instrument in this score, so I don't know what this is. Well, now I remember why I called it Ghoulies Orchestra. It's not the actual name of that cue, but the reason that I called it that was because I was trying to do an orchestra. And keep in mind that I have a rack of keyboard synthesizers, right? There's no orchestra. The only thing I have close to strings is a patch that is maybe a sample, and basically I would layer and try to do orchestral sounds or give it an orchestral feel, even though it was synth. And it kind of has that kind of, I hate to use the word cheesy, but that's the way it sounded back then, okay? I mean, not back then. Back then, it didn't sound cheesy. Now it sounds a little cheesy, dated, but fun. More fun to me than a lot of... I think you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you don't, but that's okay, because then I'd get in trouble. So I would always look for sounds that could emulate an orchestra. Now, synthesizers, especially back then, could not sound like orchestral instruments. I mean, so I would be doing a lot of layering and experimentation. Okay, it was like, come on, you got to finish, Chuck. You got to finish, Chuck. Sometimes I had 5 days to do an entire score. Okay, so I mean, for the most part, I had 3 weeks. But and too much story. This is way too much backstory. Let's go on to the next piece of music, which I'm going to stick with Ghoulies playlist here. This is the main title to Ghoulies, the full main title with the prelude and everything, where I'm trying to do a little bit of orchestral. I'm not quite getting it great, but it still has a feeling and sound that is unique. Music is about invention, not just musical notes. Ghoulies 4. Yeah, see? I took a few minutes, used my brain, and remembered which one it was. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's move on to yet another mode of music from the same era. And we're all talking, this era, by the way, of which I haven't really told you, this is early 90s, early 1990s, late 80s, early 90s. We're still hearing a lot of the influence from the scores I heard back in the 80s. And of course, I'm drawing on Goldsmith and Morricone and Elmer Bernstein and all my favorite composers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, of which I listen to ad nauseum constantly. And even obscure scores you have never heard of, I used to listen to. Oh, all right, just one. Let me tell you one I loved that you probably didn't listen to. Okay, now some of you did, but you didn't. The Christopher Comita's score for the Fearless Vampire Killers was awesome. And I would listen, I recorded it off the TV, and I would listen to it and go, this is inspiring. This was like a crazy little theme to a comedy vampire movie shot in Poland by Roman Polanski of all things. And it wasn't a very good movie, but it was so odd and different, and the music was so out there. And anyway, I'll stop talking. It's just too good. It was just too good. Oh, we're going into another era, same era, right? I digress. So Max Klevens was one of the biggest stunt coordinators in Hollywood at the time. He had done all the Arnold Schwarzenegger films, all the big action films he was doing the stunts for. And he decided he was going to retire and make movies. So he moved to Agua Dulce out here near Vasquez Rocks and opened his little movie studio and made 3 movies of which I scored. So one of the movies I scored for Max was called W.B. Blue and the Beaner. Now, this title didn't go over well with the distributor because the word beaner, come on, you can't put that in a title of a movie, even if it is 1992. So they changed it to W.B. Blue and the Bean, and then that eventually became Bailout. This movie starred Linda Blair and David Hasselhoff. And David Hasselhoff actually came over to my house while we were in pre-pro on this film because we were going to write a song together for the end titles of this film. So he comes over, and he's so tall, he hits his head on the door jamb walking into my house. And I said, oh, this is bad. This is really bad. And we sat around and talked, and we had talked about ideas. He looked at the studio, probably scoffed at my studio at the time because it wasn't a recording studio. It was just my bedroom with a bunch of synths. He was fine with my studio. He was fine with my music. But what happened was, and the reason we didn't do the song is he got a gig. He got a gig on this TV series called Baywatch and disappeared from our lives. Here's the theme to Max Klevens' W.B. Blue and the Bean. The way this music was recorded was kind of wonky. Okay, I didn't use multi-track tape recording except in rare cases where I needed to add real instruments. Basically, I had a MIDI controller. Okay, it wasn't a computer, but it was a box that had buttons, and you could control a ton of synthesizers, 16, I believe, altogether, simultaneously. And I had about 8. Each one of these synthesizers had an output, the output went into a mixer, and the little sequencer box would make them all play at once, like a giant player piano. All this music was recorded without multitrack. It was recorded directly to digital from the synthesizers. And you're only hearing about 8 different voices playing all this music. And that's why it sounds like this. That's why it sounds a little minimal. So what you're hearing, basically, is 8 to 10 voices on all this, without multitrack, without doubling, without sound on sound. That's how I had to do it, because I was doing this very quickly and as efficiently as I could. And the one thing that I will say about my career, about everything, I have never once delivered late. I have always delivered the soundtracks early. And that is something you can take to the bank, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're done with all the old stuff. So you can just tune out now if you were just here to hear the 90s stuff. I want to play 2 more tunes that I recorded in the last 2 years that were done with the new synthesizer setup. I mean, my setup is completely different than the way it used to be. It's a little more sophisticated. Not that these are big synthesizer tunes, but they'll give you an idea of what I was doing then versus what I'm doing now. And I'm still in a mode of experimentation. My learning is never over when it comes to, so I never stop learning and never stop becoming open to new ideas when it comes to synthesizers or sounds or samples. No limitations whatsoever. So here's one I called Macadamia, and for no other reason than because it's a nutty tune. Macadamia, a little nuts. Well, that sounded like a ringtone there at the end there, and it interrupted me. I didn't remember I did that. So that's sort of the new kind of synthesizer sound I can get, and I'm using this incredible synthesizer that comes with Logic, and it's called Alchemy. And it gives me that sequenced sound that sounds like there's all kinds of halos and crap floating around my brain, right? So that's what's going on in my head while I'm writing this music. Now, the next piece is a piece I did. Here's what happens. I sit down and I say, I need to write something. And I start doodling. And the doodle just expands. You start one little doodle. It's like drawing a little line on a paper. And you draw the line, and then you draw another line over it. Then you highlight that line. You draw a big space, and you color in the space. Same thing with music. You just keep building and building and building until you have this vast conglomerate of musical sounds. And then the process goes like this. You start taking things out. You take things out. You kill your children, just like editing. You get rid of all that crap. And then you have a really nice, pure thing, if you want to call it pure. And this is how I compose now, is I throw everything against the wall and see what sticks, and then pull back on it. And as you pull back, you hear all kinds of new things. Here's Synapse Karaoke. Synapse Karaoke. And I actually wrote lyrics to that and sang them for some Facebook video. I forget what I was talking about. Anyway, that is like the new experiment that's going on now with the new kinds of music that I'm working on. I love synth music. I love the idea that shows like Stranger Things are bringing back synth scores. I think that we've had a little bit too much trying to sound like an orchestra and putting orchestral scores and injecting them into places they don't really need to be. I like synth. I like orchestra too. And I think there's room for both equally, not unequally. Anyway, I'm going to wind this up, but I'd like to say, please, for those of you who have enjoyed this, let me know your reactions. Here's the thing about the internet. You put something out there and you get 5 or 6 likes and you have no idea what that means. The comments make a big difference. They give me a direction. They tell me what you like, what you don't like. I don't know. It's like I'm throwing it all against the wall, and it's just like making a musical cue. You throw it against the wall and you start to pull stuff back. Well, I don't know what to pull back unless you folks actually interact and tell me, don't do that, do this, do this, do that, do that, do this. So anyway, this has been Muse News, one of those things. And this is episode 1, actually. And we're going to end up on a little tune here that you've heard already today, but we're going to end up with it because it's short and sweet, and it's Synthy.